America and the world gather for a celebration. Coming to this country's golden shores, to New York Harbor, to honor one of liberty's proudest symbols, the Statue of Liberty.
Live from New York Harbor, the celebration continues as ABC presents Liberty Weekend. This morning, President Reagan reviews the international fleet, then the parade of the world's greatest tall ships in Operation Sail 86. Now from Governor's Island, Peter Jennings.
Good morning. There it is, New York Harbor, one of the world's greatest. And there the entrance to the Hudson River, so named for Henry Hudson, who sailed up this river first in 1609. And here this morning, from around the world, the ships of the International Naval Armada have come to pay tribute to the Statue of Liberty. And there she is, the USS Iowa, America's battleship carrying the President of the United States down between the ships of the International Naval Armada on this, the 4th of July. Good morning and welcome to a glorious and sunny day as they stand the rail on the ships from Jamaica, from Canada, from Britain, France, and West Germany. It won't be long before the ships of another age make their way up through this harbor to cross and salute the statue and the President of the United States and, of course, the President of France, Francois Mitterrand, who will also this morning make his way down this great river in the eastern United States to Governor's Island to pay tribute once again to the Statue of Liberty. This is Liberty Weekend, and on board with the President, ABC's Sam Donaldson. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning, Peter. We're on the deck of the Iowa, as you said, moving down the Hudson River. We're just passing the trade towers now. President Reagan came aboard about 25 or 30 minutes ago by helicopter from the Rockefeller Estate, where he's been staying. 1,500 men of the Iowa here met him along the rail. It was quite a sight. And in a few moments, we're going to see these great ships from 33 ships from 14 countries. Mrs. Reagan, of course, is with the President, as are his top officials, the Chief of Staff, Donald Regan, Secretary Schultz and Weinberger, and National Security Advisor Poindexter.
Sam, I must confess that some of us were quite amazed last night. The President, who looks as vigorous as always this morning, we thought he was freezing last night because it turns out to have been one of the coldest days of the year on this particular date in New York history. How is he this morning?
Well, Peter, I think you said something about the President and the cold last night. This ship has a great deal of electronics on it. Radars are going and everything, which is interfering with the signal. But it was cold for a lot of people out there. But, of course, President and Mrs. Reagan had blankets in their box, and he seemed to have survived very nicely.
And there you stand beneath the 16-inch guns. You've already had a number of 21-gun salutes. Are you going to fire one?
Well, the ship has been firing from a 5-inch gun, one salute at the top, and then as the President has gone down the river, other naval vessels have fired 21-gun salutes. There's one going off right now. I don't know the name of it, but it's a United States Navy ship, and Mr. Reagan will probably come out where you can see him better. There he is now with the First Lady, and they're going to take this salute.
Salutes from the sea and salutes from the air. It is going to be a glorious day, but it is also going to be a noisy day. As the aerobatic teams from the U.S. Navy and the Air Force come and do their stuff over Governor's Island, where the Coast Guard has made us so welcome throughout Liberty Weekend. The President and Mrs. Reagan now rounding the tip of Battery Park, the very edge of this 10-mile island, which has seen so much maritime history. decision was not to fire them in New York Harbor, lest they blow out all the windows in all the glass buildings around the edge of Battery Park in Battery Park City. In Battery Park City, Lynn Scher. Good morning, Lynn. Crowd gathering?
Yes, Peter. So are the helicopters, but I think we can talk over the police helicopter. The crowds are gathering, and what you need to know is the view that we have from here that you are seeing is not just for the crowds who are here today. There are people who actually live here. Battery Park City, a new development at the end of Lower Manhattan, and people live here. This is what they could see every day. Incidentally, the battleship Iowa, as it goes by, I'm sure you can see an escort of almost every kind of boat in this harbor. There are sailboats, there are power boats, there are cruisers, and there was even a kayak that went by about 5 minutes ago. It seems as if everybody wants to travel with the president, with the battleship, be in its wake or help lead the way, and here comes a tugboat, as a matter of fact. Just about every kind of craft that you normally see in this part of the island. But as you know, we are not used to that battleship gray. Today it has such a festive air about it. The crowds are beginning to arrive. The grandstands here, some people have paid for these tickets. Some of them have been given them because they're part of a corporate sponsor. And the stands are beginning to fill up. It took a little while, but there's quite a bit of activity here right now. Here comes the tugboat. This is what we're a lot more used to seeing here in New York Harbor.
Thank you, Lynn, very much.
And the Circle Line behind it. Peter?
Thank you, Lynn. Lynn, by the way, standing on land where there was none before, because Battery Park City, of which Lynn spoke this morning, is actually the result of landfill from the trade towers, the twin trade towers, which you'll see a lot of today. They are the two tallest twin towers in the world, and what a vantage point this morning. There's a great deal more to come. If the harbor looks crowded now, just wait. We'll be back.
ABC's presentation of Liberty Weekend is brought to you by The Prudential, offering a full range of insurance and other financial services. America's best back trucks. At Dodge, we don't just talk tough, we prove it. Kraft, which brings you good food and good food ideas. And IBM.
Good morning from New York Harbor, and we hope you have a glorious 4th of July. It is a glorious day. Here in New York, the sun has risen in the east and shines down now upon the almost placid waters of New York Harbor as the USS Iowa, one of this country's great battleships with a great history dating from the Second World War, built in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, carries the President of the United States out of the Hudson River and into the port itself, beneath the shadow of the Statue of Liberty, to pay tribute this Liberty Weekend to the Statue of Liberty herself, to the 100th anniversary since France gave the Lady to this country to honor the union between the two and to honor what this country stands for. That is why we are here today, to honor the Lady, but also to have a very good time on a very exciting day. There's going to be more activity in this harbor than probably at any time there has been before in terms of international activity. The international armada of Navy ships of today presently being reviewed by the President, and in part reviewed by the French President, Francois Mitterrand. And then out in this harbor before too very long, the ships of earlier days and the modern ships crossing as the old ships, the tall ships, come up from the south, and the battleships from around the world, and the cruisers and the frigates and the oilers. We are looking now at Governor's Island, the home of the U.S. Coast Guard, the largest Coast Guard station in the world, the first European to set sight on this little piece of land was probably Giovanni de Verrazzano back in 1524. And there, the platform and the stage for the opening ceremonies last night, and the podium from which President Reagan and French President Mitterrand will this morning review the tall ships. We hope you will stay with us throughout the morning. We're going to be here for a number of hours, and we need help. Joining us this morning, a man who knows as much about America's maritime tradition as anybody, Revel Carr, the director of the Mystic Seaport in Connecticut on America's East Coast. Revel? Have you ever seen anything quite like this?
I have not. It is quite a day, and I think as we see
the President receiving his salute from the French destroyer out there. It is just a preview of what's going to come. One of the nice things is the way the naval vessels are anchored all along the parade route, and they themselves will be honoring the tall ships.
One of the things I think we have come to realize over the last 4 or 5 days out here is how vast this harbor is. With the Statue of Liberty at the very center, she goes out 750 miles of coastline. When all these ships came in, we thought it would be crowded. They got lost, didn't they?
It looks from one location, if you look across the harbor, as if it is wall-to-wall boats, and yet an aerial view shows that there's quite a bit of room between them. It's a dicey situation for anyone moving around, but if they found a good location, they'll have a fine day.
And we promise you, those of you who live far from the sea, that before the day is over, Revel Carr will teach us all about topsails and topgallants and foresails and yard arms and standing the yard and standing the rail. Revel Carr from the Mystic Seaport. If you live on the east coast of the United States or you visit, it is a great place to visit to see something of America's maritime tradition. People have begun to gather here, or began to gather here, from across the country and around the world some days ago. Last night and yesterday there began to build a real excitement here. Last night, as the President relit the Statue of Liberty, there she stands at the very epicenter of New York Harbor with the Iowa there in the foreground. The excitement in this city, which is occasionally known to be blasé, was really quite something to behold. Many of the sailors on these international ships have had shore leave here, and the stories are already becoming legion. The USS Iowa, commissioned here in the Brooklyn Navy Yard in 1943, and part of a flyover conducted by the French, the Thunderbirds from the U.S. Air Force, the Blue Angels from the Navy. The F-16 and the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds, and the French are here with theirs, and the Harriers are here. Not only the Navy Harriers from the U.S. Navy, but the Harriers, the vertical takeoff jets from the British aircraft carrier, the Ark Royal, which most recently saw action in the Falkland Islands. And there she is, as we said, the Iowa. As much as any modern ship here today, she has history. She carried President Roosevelt to the Tehran Conference with Winston Churchill. In 1944, she went to the Pacific. And at the time of the surrender to Japan, she was the flagship for the Japanese surrender ceremonies. The surrender ceremonies, as you know, actually took place on the Missouri. Well, there are thousands and thousands of boats and ships from which you could view the ceremonies today. I confess one of the people we envy is ABC's Sander Van Ocker, who was on the old and glorious presidential yacht, the Sequoia. Good morning, Sandy.
Good morning, Peter. We are aboard the presidential yacht Sequoia, and we're trailing right behind the battleship Iowa, which, as we all know by now, has President and Mrs. Reagan. We're coming down, we've just left the west bank of the Hudson River, and we're getting onto the harbor, and we're coming down here, and we're being followed, I think, by a flotilla of ships. The presidential yacht Sequoia has served 8 presidents over 44 years. It started with Herbert Hoover in 1931. Actually, it was bought by the Commerce Department to intercept rum runners on the Mississippi. 8 presidents, though, used it until Jimmy Carter came along and decided it was an extravagance and sold it for $276,000. But I tell you, aboard it today, one is reminded, looking at this teak and mahogany, of what J.P. Morgan said when someone asked him what his yacht cost. And he said, anybody who has to ask what a yacht costs can't afford one.
Sandy, let me interrupt you for just a second, because there you see yet another of the aerial tributes being paid to the Statue of Liberty today. We believe it is the French who share the colors of red, white, and blue, and who have participated to such a degree from such earliest times in America's history. from the Revolutionary War. Sandy, let us come back to you on the Sequoia for a second. You talked about how much the President, Jimmy Carter, sold it for. It's cost about $2 million to restore, hasn't it? Let us tell you a little something about the communications in New York Harbor today. We have about 75 cameras, I think, at last count, all around New York Harbor and up and down the Hudson River. Some of them are up there, some of them are down here. It isn't that they don't work, it's sometimes that the paths of communication to get them all back to our transmitting station in New York City to push out around the rest of the country is sometimes difficult. So when we lose communication in picture, I hope you'll forgive us. This is the largest and most complicated television broadcast, technically speaking, that ABC News has ever mounted. We'll come back and continue it as the President and Mrs. Reagan on board the Iowa come to the Statue of Liberty. We'll be back in a moment. Good morning and welcome back to New York Harbor. There's a portion of what you're going to see on this very exciting 4th of July, and we hope you're enjoying your day off. The tall ships as they make their way from lower New York Bay up towards the Verrazano Narrows Bridge from Sandy Hook, where they spent last night in rather rough conditions. So rough, in fact, that some of the sea captains could not come for the opening ceremony. And there from one of our helicopters is a look of New York Harbor as she begins to fill up this morning. And there in the center of the frame, passing yet another little flotilla, the USS Iowa, with President and Mrs. Reagan making their way here to Governor's Island. There the USS John F. Kennedy, just going out of screen on your right, and the Cunard liner, the Queen Elizabeth II, which has come here to pay tribute to we colonials. We saw a sign in the harbor yesterday. Some of you, if you were watching yesterday, may have heard us mention it, welcoming we colonials back to Britain, saying all was forgiven, that if we went home to Britain, we could have tea and crumpets. The USS John F. Kennedy, the largest ship taking part in the International Naval Review. She is, of course, the namesake of the 35th President, John F. Kennedy. And overhead, once again, part of the aerial tribute, which you will hear and we hope see throughout the day. The U.S. Navy, the Blue Angels, the Thunderbirds from the Air Force, over the trade towers, which dwarf all the other buildings at the lower end of Manhattan. A beautiful day. The cold has gone, the rain has gone. There is hardly a cloud in the sky, just a mist of white. A beautiful day for the President and the Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, and John Lehman, the Secretary of the Navy. And all the folks have just come to have a plain good time and listen to the ships from the other nations salute the President and the statue. Mentioned the USS John F. Kennedy, the largest ship taking part. She is there in one of the prime locations in the harbor, and there is her crew in white, standing the rail, as they say. And on board, ABC's Rebecca Chase. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning, Peter.
How are things there?
As you may know, 23...
Well, they're manning the rail here, and we have one of the best positions here for both this magnificent air and sea show. It's quite a lot of fun to be with thousands of sailors watching a parade of ships going by. They're as interested and knowledgeable as you can imagine.
Rebecca, give us a sense of how big the Kennedy is.
I'm sorry, how what?
Can you give us a sense of how big she is when you're actually standing on board?
Peter, this is a floating city. It is one of the largest conventionally powered ships. It has a 5-acre flight deck. Normally there are launching as many as 95 aircraft here, as 15 seconds apart. It is usually home for 5,000 sailors. Many of them are on leave today, but there's many guests and VIPs, and they expect to feed as many as 5,000 to 10,000 people here. In fact, you can probably see the pictures of the barbecue and the tents and everybody in uniform and everyone's shipshape.
And there is an aerial view of you with the long side, giving us some sense of contrast. The Staten Island ferry was that orange ferry underneath the great deck of the Kennedy, which is almost a quarter of an acre in size. You've heard the Kennedy mentioned, which looks very festive, as you say, Rebecca, but you've heard the Kennedy's name mentioned in the news a lot recently. She's been serving in the Mediterranean as part of the support fleet. A on the Libyan coast and on the Lebanese coast. She's over 1,000 feet long. And as Rebecca Chase said, she is a city with everything on board, her own bakery, her own movies, her own television studios, her own newspapers. And there the civilians beginning to crowd their way for a better look, not only at the statue, which we say unabashedly looks fantastic, and the same, as she has always done. Those of you across the country who may have thought she was going to look different after her restoration are in for a surprise as you take many looks at her today, because she is still that wonderful same bottle green. USS Iowa now has moved across in front of the statue and is heaving to very gently there, and on board again, Sam Donaldson. Sam, the president's going to leave fairly shortly, right? We wondered about the Kennedy Rebel car. Do you know the Kennedy well? Have you been on her?
And the Kennedy, one of the remarkable things in getting a sense of scale for the Kennedy is that if you stood it on end, it's the size of the Empire State Building. So people who have a sense of how big that building is that's what's floating out here. And it's incredible to think of, as was said, a floating city, 5,000 people, in a ship the size of the Empire State Building.
You were saying to us earlier, we've been blessing the fact that we've had such a lovely day because it was so darn cold here last night. But as the balloons rise in the first order of celebration, what kind of a sailing day is this? It doesn't look very good.
It's not going to be a strong sailing day. There are two disadvantages: a very light breeze, and some of those vessels need some air to move with. But the other thing is that the wind is down the Hudson, and that is not going to suit well the square-rigged ships. So they will set their square sails, probably coming back down the river.
Over Manhattan and over Governor's Island, where the Delaware Indians and the Mannahattas Indians used to paddle, the aerobatic teams of the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds. I almost sense this morning that we are seeing a fractional lull here in the excitement. There was so much excitement last night when the statue was rededicated, unveiled electronically, as many of you, we hope, saw by the president. And then her torch lit again. There was a real high note of enthusiasm in this city. And again, we hope across the country. We're almost assured across the country. This morning, it's almost like people are rolling down to the shore gently to enjoy the fort. Many of those people have come down to Battery Park, where once there were guns and now there were just people. Bill Blakemore, people showing up in large number there this morning?
They are showing up, Peter. In fact, some of them have been here all night. When we came down early this morning, I saw some of them still stretched out on their blankets under the trees. But the party, which started last night, is certainly well underway here now. People are pointing out in the harbor in every direction. It's the perfect harbor day here. Everywhere you look, something's happening. And, of course, this particular point at the very lower tip of Manhattan has some relevance today because it was here in 1855 that the first immigrants who were kept track of by the United States government landed right here on this very promenade. You can hear the crowd cheering. They're looking for a party, any excuse to cheer. Airplanes going over, blimps going over, boats going past, warships from the 16th century and the 20th. All of them are delighting the crowd here. I've been speaking with some of the folks who came through this morning, some from Ohio. There was one man with a backpack who'd come in from Germany, and he said, "What's going on?" We told him, and he decided he might stay the weekend.
Bill, thank you very much. And as the day goes on, because of course it's only 9:30 in the morning here on the east coast of the United States, we can guarantee you that the crowds, both of people on shore and in the harbor on their boats and ships, will continue to increase. The tall ships making their way up the harbor, the International Naval Armada in the harbor itself. ABC's news coverage of Operation Sail will continue after this and a word from your local station.
Coverage of Operation Sail continues. Here now, Peter Jennings.
Good morning. Again, there she is, the Statue of Liberty, the reason we are all here on this 4th of July, to rededicate her on the 100th anniversary of the occasion on which she was given to the United States of America by France. that great sculpture by the French sculptor Auguste Bartholdi, all 151 feet of her. We'll see a great deal of her throughout the day. She changes, it seems, almost as you look at her. Depends where the light is. Last night she looked magnificent. She looks one way with the morning sun, another way with an evening sun. When Bartholdi came to this country, he took one look at Liberty Island, which was then called Bedloes Island, and he said, "This is the place. I have found the admirable spot. It is here I want my colossus, my colossal statue to stand." And there on the top, the torch, refurbished and lighted by President Reagan last night. The original design of the torch it is now, the one that Bartholdi designed more than 100 years ago. In part, as we said, a tribute to the union between France and the United States, but also to try to give a boost to those people in France who were tired of their monarch and wanted to have a government like the United States had developed. We want to try to give you some sense before the day goes on, and there's a great deal going to be happening throughout the day, where we are going to be sitting and what you can see in terms of geography. It's a wonderful day to use your imagination. Let's go to a satellite. Literally, a photograph taken by a French company called Spotimage, which has taken us from the bottom of your picture there at Sandy Hook, outside Lower New York Bay, where the tall ships were in harbor last night, up past Staten Island. There's Brooklyn, and there's Queens, and there's the Brooklyn Bridge you can see. There's Manhattan, 10 miles long, so named for a variety of reasons, but in part perhaps for the Mannahattanus Indians, a sub-tribe of the Delaware. And there's the Hudson River, discovered by Henry Hudson in 1609. Could we have one more look at it, if it is possible? It used to be called the North River. And there, New Jersey on the side. And just imagine, this is a wonderful day in which to use your imagination. More than 100 years ago, for 200 years ago, people coming here and then fanning out across the state of New Jersey to discover the rest of the country. Manhattan, the Dutch, really the first European settlers to come and settle on that 10-mile long island. It's really an archipelago here. And where the Indians once paddled, and where the French and the British and the Americans fought, and the Dutch. Now this extraordinarily peaceful display looking down towards the tallest twin towers in the world, the tall twin trade center towers. A lot of history, a lot of chance to use your imagination. 50 years ago, one of ABC's most venerable correspondents, Robert Trout, who now lives in Madrid for us, was here. And here's what it was like 50 years ago.
A thin mist on that day in 1936 softened the sharp angles of the New York skyline across the bay from the Statue of Liberty. So dense were the crowds cheering President Franklin D. Roosevelt, campaigning for a second term in the White House, that he was 20 minutes late for her golden anniversary. He traveled to the statue not in a warship, but in an ordinary city ferry boat. The president was there to remind us that liberty was as precious then as the day the statue was dedicated.
50 years ago, our old neighbor and friend from across the sea gave us this monument to stand at the principal eastern gateway to the Western world. We will not forget that liberty has made her home here, nor shall her chosen altar be neglected.
And President Roosevelt, who recognized that Europe's dictators were on the road to World War II, referred to a new threat to liberty.
To the message of liberty which America sends to all the world must be added her message of peace. Even in times as troubled and uncertain as these.
But in 1936, most of us were not thinking of defending liberty. On the island that day, we were intent on celebrating liberty, even as we are today. Robert Trout, ABC News, New York.
Bob Trout, who has come home from Spain this weekend, like so many people have come from the old world on board ships, to celebrate the 4th of July and the Statue of Liberty. And as I recall, Bob Trout is a man who, to this day, still doesn't like airplanes, has always preferred to travel by ship, and who would not. On the 4th of July, tribute to the Statue of Liberty and to the President of the United States and the President of France, who have gathered here this morning on Governor's Island, along with yet another collection of very important persons, and in some cases people who have purchased at very expensive prices, tickets to what we're calling, I guess, really Governor's Island Stadium today. That's where the opening ceremonies were last night, and there's going to be another show this morning, which we hope you will enjoy, as the President. And there are the tall ships coming up with their sails set in part, their great yard arms, which Rebel Carr from the Mystic Seaport will tell us about before long. But we'll be back in just a moment to meet the French ambassador to the United Nations. There it is, the Verrazano-Narrows Bridge, linking Brooklyn and Staten Island, one of the longest suspension bridges in the world. So named for Giovanni de Verrazano, the first European to come into this great bay in 1524. You know what he was doing, foolish fellow? He was looking for the Northwest Passage to China. He didn't find it, and so he went home. He was working for the French king of the day. He'd come up the Atlantic coast, come into this bay, come to these narrows, the narrow neck, really, where the upper and lower bays are joined. He thought it was a very tranquil place. He saw the mouth of the Hudson River, took some soundings, but then he went home and he told the French king, no, it is not the way to China. And now, of course, it is the threshold to the New World, this magnificent bridge. And here on Governor's Island, from where we sit, up the harbor, towards Manhattan, ABC's Pierre Salinger, who has come from France this weekend to help us celebrate the French in the land of his birth, and who is with a distinguished Frenchman who has made his temporary home here. Good morning, Pierre.
Good morning, Peter, and I am here with Ambassador Claude de Camelaria, the French ambassador to the United Nations. And Mr. Ambassador Claude, what did last night's ceremony mean for you in terms of relations between France and the United States?
Pierre, I will tell you very frankly, for all the Frenchmen here, our heart has been beating very, very strongly. It has been a unique, and it is a unique experience. I think it is good that the public opinion of both countries should understand each other better. I must say that it's not enough to have the governments having excellent and good relations, which is the case, but it is important that the public opinion in this country, in the United States, knows that the French like the United States. Every poll in France always when you ask the French people, which country you like best, 60% always do answer the United States, because they are so close links. From the start, when we are at school, we know that we have been linked with the United States from the very beginning of the independence of the United States. And not only Lafayette, and not only Rochambeau, and not de Grasse, but we learn about Washington, about Benjamin Franklin, about all your great men. And this is important that they should be, and thanks to the remarkable and warm speech made by President Reagan yesterday night, that we are not going to forget, as well as the speech made by President Mitterrand, as he said, for 100 years more, the great friendship between these two countries will go on stronger and stronger.
Why do you think many Americans go to France with the impression that the French are really anti-American?
Why do you think that the French people coming from the province have some problem with the Parisians? I'm a Parisian myself. The Parisians are interesting people but difficult people. But I can tell you something. The Americans, when they come to Paris, make a mistake. They stay in Paris, and they should go in the province, and they will see that they are liked very strongly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador.
Bye-bye, Pierre.
Peter?
Thank you very much, Pierre. I must tell you that Ambassador Camelaria is one of the most avid devotees of the United States, and if you think it isn't a French name, you're correct. His family came from Georgia in what is now the Soviet Union. He is a gregarious, outspoken, and outgoing ambassador to the United Nations for his country. The President now, if I am not mistaken, has landed on Governor's Island, if someone can please help me, or is he still on the Iowa? He is still on the Iowa at this point. He will leave the Iowa shortly and come to Governor's Island. President Reagan last night was positively effusive in his remarks about France. In fact, surprised quite a number of Frenchmen who were here. The French and the American people, he said, have forged a special friendship, as the ambassador reminded us this morning, over 2 centuries. And then President Mitterrand got up and spoke his French, but you will recall at the end of his remarks paying tribute to the Statue of Liberty in the United States, he said, "Happy birthday, Miss Liberty." And that got an enormous round of applause from the crowd here on Governor's Island. The President having pointed out to him the convergence now of the old ships and the new ships, for in not very long from now, the old and the new will cross and bisect New York Harbor. How do you run a show like this? It isn't very easy. ABC's Carol Simpson is on the command ship for the International Naval Review, the USS Nashville, which is in Brooklyn. Good morning, Carol.
Good morning, Peter. We are in the flag plot room of the USS Nashville, and this ship and this room is acting as kind of an airport control tower for the International Naval Review, except they're not controlling airplanes, they're controlling the sea traffic out there in New York Harbor. These Naval Reserve officers, that is who's manning the ship, is in contact with all of the ships that are taking part in the International Review, and it is a major communications control point for the International Naval Review. This is a place where if there is any problem anywhere, this is one of the places that we will know about it first, because there are Secret Service, FBI agents, and Naval intelligence officers aboard helping to monitor the security. So this is has been a beehive of activity the last 2 days, and a lot more activity is expected to be developing here as the day moves along.
Good, Carol. Thank you very much for joining us. So far, it has gone like clockwork, as has every element of Liberty Weekend. And there, yet another of the modern naval ships, the Iowa itself, beg your pardon, with the President now having hove to, as they say, Rebel Car. What does hove to mean?
Well, that would mean stop, but I think she's still moving slowly down the line of naval vessels. She's still receiving her salute and working her way past the submarine tender, the MRS Land. We saw the MRS Land and a submarine alongside. A ship like that, the Land is just replete with shops to take care of any need it has.
The USS Iowa, and much more to come. The tall ships coming from the south, the International Naval Armada at rest. We'll be back in just a moment. And I suspect we'll say again, such a day to use your imagination. Such sights this great bay has seen. It was from this spot in 1785, about where the President is talking to, we think, Captain Sequist on board the Iowa, that the first vessel ever to sail from America to China set out, taking mail to the infant republic and to the emperor. The President talking to a man who may well come from any part of America. One of the things that has struck us here in the last couple of days, in fact, this has struck us many times before, is how many of America's seamen in the Navy come from parts of the country that are thousands of miles, in some cases, from the sea. Admiral William Crowe, the present commander of the Joint Chiefs, is from Oklahoma. Admiral Frank Kelso, who commanded the operation that first crossed Colonel Gaddafi's so-called line of death, from the Carolina-Tennessee border. So while America is not known in other parts of the world for particularly having a long and deep maritime tradition, there are sailors from every state in the Union here today. And there the Verrazano's narrow bridge, and let's go across to the Jersey side, to New Jersey, who shares this harbor with New York. As we look at the Iowa nestled on the north side, and there nestled on the south side and on the north side, these little flotillas all up and down the Jersey shore. There some of them nestled right beside the Central Railroad of New Jersey. Now there's a piece of history for you. It was built on the edge of New York Harbor in 1889, so that people coming to Ellis Island could make their way to other parts of America. In fact, it proved to be too small for the massive numbers of people. So it was expanded and renovated in 1914, and there it stands today in all of that glory that the railroad station and Ellis Island and the statue show in terms of being refurbished. It's now part of Liberty State Park on the New Jersey side, and over there, looking at the trade towers, is ABC Stephen Gear. A lot of people gathering over there as well, Stephen?
Yeah, we're some distance from the people, Peter, but we can see actually hundreds of them perhaps a couple of hundred yards away. The railroad station, incidentally, was shut down in 1967, but interestingly enough, it's estimated that half the people who came into Ellis Island went out on railroad trains to various parts of the country from that very station. Now, the view you've just been seeing, Battery Park, that's the best view in New Jersey today, and you have to be here. I grew up outside New York City, and I didn't know this park was here, and I didn't know this view was here. It's extraordinary. Incidentally, in all those buildings over there, normally unoccupied on Independence Day, many of those offices occupied today because the views are tremendous. We have extraordinary views here of the small ships, the big ships. We've seen the flyovers. As a matter of fact, our camera has been the one that has given you some of those airplanes flying over. You mentioned earlier that there seemed to be a lull in the celebration. Well, I wasn't at last night's ceremonies, but it's pretty exciting here with the guns going off and the planes going overhead and all these people on the boats applauding and cheering when the planes go over and the guns go off. Peter?
Do I detect a little of our New Jersey side of the harbor, Steve?
I don't live in New Jersey, Peter.
A lot of that competition, of course, exists between the state of New Jersey and New York, and there's a place up on the Hudson River called West New York, New Jersey, which will complicate things even further. Stephen, you've got a big concert over there tonight.
Yes, a great concert here. It's one of the many events that are coming up. I'm not going to be privileged to be at this concert, Peter. I envied you last night as the ceremonies were taking place, and I hope our great music coverage continues.
Well, quite frankly, I envy those people who were wearing long underwear. Thanks very much, Steve. Stephen Gear on the New Jersey side of the harbor. In fact, the Statue of Liberty is actually closer to the New Jersey shore than it is to the New York shore. And there she is, the USS Iowa, and on board, Sam Donaldson. Where goes the president? Goes Sam. Sam?
Well, Peter, the president is about to leave here. He's going to go now to watch the sailing ships with Francois Mitterrand, to get the deed to the Statue of Liberty, and, of course, to have a working lunch with the French president. I've got to tell you, Mr. Reagan probably is sorry to leave this ship because he has just enjoyed this thoroughly, judging from what we've been able to see up here on the number 1 gun turret. It's combined today two of his greatest enjoyments, which is patriotism, of course, and love of the military. The president loves to salute. He loves the military. There's a lot of little kids still in Ronald Reagan, which many people say is part of his charm.
Thank you, Sam. It looks like we're about to lose our electronic signal from the USS New Jersey as we look at its massive 16-inch guns. The Iowa, I should say, not the New Jersey. The New Jersey, by the way, is the sister ship. And one of the reasons we sometimes get the two in our mind mixed up is because the last time one of those great 16-inch guns was fired was by the USS New Jersey on the coast of Lebanon. When the U.S. Marines, you will recall, came under fire, the USS New Jersey fired on positions up in the hills above Beirut. America became involved much more directly than the president perhaps had wanted in Lebanon's civil war, and it was not long thereafter that the Marines were withdrawn from Lebanon. And it is interesting to note that here last night, as on Governor's Island, as the first tall ships approached the island, that there were more than one silent tribute to the people who died on board Challenger, the Marines who died in Lebanon. And there is the site which so many people have longed for since 1976, Rebel Car, during the bicentennial is the last time we saw the tall ships here.
Yes, the whole tradition of Operation Sail goes back to the early 50s when, through the English Sail Training Association, they began to get these tall ships together. They were a disappearing breed, and people were fascinated. We've had a great event here in '64 and another one in '76. It was, in fact, an artist, a fellow named Niels Hansel, who, with Frank Brainerd, a great maritime historian, brought together this idea of assembling the tall ships. Niels Niels Hansel and Brainerd went out, got in touch with the people who had the ships, encouraged them to come, worked with other people.
Is that the Amerigo Vespucci? How good is mine? Well, it isn't.
A little hard to tell.
Many of them, of course, have steel hulls now, don't they, Revel? I mean, they don't have wooden hulls for the most part.
Yes, these ships, most of the Class A ships have been built as training vessels, and they've been built in modern times, in the 30s, many of them, and some quite recently.
The President and Mrs. Reagan now get ready to walk across. Look at those wonderful teak decks on the Iowa. As the President and Mrs. Reagan, the President once again wearing a hat or cap from the Iowa. I don't doubt for a second the Navy takes enormous pride in that particular kind of advertising. Ever pay a visit to a naval ship? There's quite a decent chance you'll come away with a hat. The President and Mrs. Reagan will now get on board a helicopter, if I'm not mistaken, and fly here to Governor's Island, this island which is about 170 acres over on the New York side, to take his position on somewhat, well, I was going to say somewhat firmer ground, except that there's nothing firmer than the deck of the Iowa, and take the salute from the tall ships as they make their way into New York Harbor. And just in case you didn't hear Sam Donaldson, I think we would all concur the President likes nothing more than to pay a visit to America's service personnel, whether the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, or the Coast Guard, which has done such an extraordinary job of keeping this harbor organized. Governor's Island, to which the President is now making his way, is actually the headquarters for the U.S. Coast Guard all the way from Florida up to New England. And we cannot say it too many times, they have been wonderful hosts to the international press here today.
Might be mentioned, Peter, that helicopters have become a very common thing aboard naval vessels. They, not only for transportation, but as part of their armament.
For that matter, they've become something of a common sight on board private vessels. Malcolm Forbes of Forbes magazine, I notice, has commissioned a new yacht for himself, which has been making its way around the harbor from time to time, and he has a helicopter on board, takes up the entire back deck.
It's a comfortable way to go to sea on Highlander with Malcolm Forbes' yacht.
And so we're going to leave the USS Iowa for a while now. She was the focal point of the International Naval Review. As we said, she was the namesake of one of the most famous class of ships in American naval history. She was the most powerful ship built during the Second World War. She was in the Pacific. She was in the Atlantic. She carried President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill and Joseph Stalin. Now today, underneath those 16-inch guns, which they will not fire lest they break all the windows in Manhattan, she has carried the President and Mrs. Reagan. And now they will leave and come here to Governor's Island. Our coverage, ABC News coverage of Operation Sail, will continue after this and a word from your local station.